Welcome to Professor Ortlieb's Bluebook podcast, a series of podcasts designed to teach 1L students the basics of legal citation using the Bluebook. In the last episode, we introduced the Bluebook and its parts. We also introduced the basic case citation and the format for case names and reporter information. In this episode, we will discuss Bluebook Rules 10.4 and 10.5, which will enable us to complete the basic case citation by incorporating the court name, jurisdiction name, and date of decision. You'll recall from our last lesson that a basic case citation contains three elements: a case name, reporter coordinates, and a jurisdiction and date parenthetical. This lesson focuses on the jurisdiction and date parenthetical. Rule 10.4 on page 104 and Blue Page's Rule 10.1.3 on page 13 tell us how to format the court and jurisdiction information for a basic case cite. Every long cite must indicate in some way or fashion which court decided the case. This information is placed in parentheses after the reporter information. To format this information, we will need to use several tables, including T1, T2, T7, and T10. Let's start with formatting a U.S. Supreme Court parenthetical, as it is the easiest. It contains no jurisdiction or court name in the parentheses. If the decision was rendered by a sole justice, you would name the justice in the parenthetical as indicated here in the second example. Remember, many of the examples you're going to see in these slides include pound signs or hashtags. Those hashtags are placed to help you see the spacing in the cite. You would only include those hashtags in cites you produce for Bluebook homeworks. The hashtags are not used in an ordinary cite in any other writing that you will do. The court name and jurisdiction information for a federal circuit court case is a bit more complicated. The name and jurisdiction information for the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals is indicated by using the ordinal designated for the circuit, followed by a space, followed by capital C-I-R period. Rule 6.2b tells us that we should use numbers followed by TH or D to indicate ordinals. Therefore, 7th Circuit is indicated by the number 7 followed by TH. Note that the TH appears on the same line as the 7, not as a superscript. Many word processing programs will autocorrect ordinals to appear above the line as a superscript. You should probably turn that preference off. Now, before coming to law school, you would probably type second for second and third for third, where you keep the R and the N for third and second. But note that under Rule 6.2b, you actually need to eliminate the N or the R. Therefore, the proper format for a case from the 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals would appear as 2D space CIR period. So how would you indicate the circuit for a non-numbered circuit? You'll need to abbreviate the Circuit Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit as DC space SIR. So where did I get that from? Well, first, T1 uses the DC Circuit as an example on page 234. But if I didn't catch that, I would need to look at T10 for the appropriate abbreviation for my geographic location. Let's unpack that idea a bit more by looking at the jurisdiction and court information for federal district court cases. For federal district court cases, we will give the district name, but not the division. A district court may have several subdivisions, different courthouses, etc. Those divisions are for administrative convenience. Normally, we will ignore the division information. The name of the district comes before the geographical information, but to format the full court information, you may need to consult several tables. For example, T1, T7, and T10. Look at table T7 on pages 498 to 499 and reproduced in part here. This contains the abbreviations for court names. It tells us that the federal district court is abbreviated D period. Note that this abbreviation is different from a state district court, which would be abbreviated DIST. You'll recall from our very first class that we also have northern districts, southern districts, and even middle districts within our federal district court system. Table T7 will tell you how to abbreviate each of those district modifiers. In order to abbreviate the geographical location that comes with your court name, you'll need to consult T10, which starts on page 502. T10 contains all the geographical abbreviations you might need, ranging from states to cities and territories to foreign jurisdictions. Note that states do not necessarily have the same abbreviation as their postal codes. Putting T1, T7, and T10 together, we can now generate our abbreviations for a federal district court opinion. So, what would the abbreviation be for a case from the Northern District of Illinois? Well, looking at T7 and T10 in combination, you'll find that you abbreviate Northern District to ND period, and Illinois' abbreviation is ILL period. What about the District of New Mexico? Well, this one might be a little bit more challenging. We have district is D, and New Mexico, according to table T10, is NM. It looks just like its postal code. But what should the spacing look like? Should there be a space between the D and the NM? Well, we can look at the Blue Pages tip right here and print in Blue Pages Rule 10.1.3 that we're going to close up single adjacent capitals. And this is actually just a summary of Blue Book spacing rules in 6.1a. We're going to cover this rule in more detail later, but for now, remember to close up all adjacent single capital letters, but place a space before and after a longer abbreviation. So Illinois, because it's a longer abbreviation, needed that space before it, but New Mexico, being made up of all adjacent single capital letters, would be closed up with no spacing. So, what's the abbreviation for a case arising from the Federal District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee? Table T7 tells us that the abbreviation for Middle District is MD period. T10 tells us that Tennessee is 10. Since this second abbreviation is longer and not made up of single capital letters, we will need a space between MD and 10, which you can see here. Now let's break down Rule 10.4 for state court decisions. You're going to want to have your Blue Book handy for this one, though I will reproduce some of the tables up here for your convenience. Let's look up Illinois in the state section of T1. Now, whenever we're going to craft a state court decision citation, the parenthetical is going to require to use T1 as a guide for abbreviating that court name and jurisdiction. Right here you have the example from New Jersey. Notice that the names of each court are in bold. Immediately after the name of the court is a parenthetical containing an abbreviation. That abbreviation is generally what you will include in your cite before the dated decision. The only time that abbreviation will be altered is when you are not citing to a regional reporter like the Northeastern, Atlantic, Pacific, etc. Therefore, when citing a New Jersey Supreme Court case while using an Atlantic reporter cite, you will include the jurisdiction, New Jersey here, but not an abbreviation for the name of the court. In fact, you should never include the name of the court if it's the highest court of appeal for that jurisdiction. So what would be the jurisdiction and court abbreviation for the Hawaii Supreme Court? Let's take a look at T1. Would it be Supreme Court Hawaii A or just Hawaii B? According to table T1, we see that the Supreme Court is the highest court of appeal for Hawaii. Therefore, the abbreviation for the Hawaii Supreme Court would simply be HAW period. So what would you do for your court and jurisdiction abbreviation if you're not using the regional reporter? Well, first, use an alternative reporter as listed in table T1. Remember that we learned last week that the list of reporters in T1 is organized in preference order. The higher the reporter is listed in the table, the higher the preference. Second, if you're using one of those alternate reporters, we may alter our court and jurisdiction abbreviation a bit further. Not only will we not specify the name of court if it is the highest court of appeal, but we won't specify the name of the court if it is unambiguously conveyed by the reporter name. Look at T1 for Illinois. Notice that the Illinois Appellate Court cases from 2011 and earlier are published in the Illinois Appellate Court Reports, which are abbreviated ILAP. Therefore, if you were not citing to the Northeastern Reporter, but instead using the Appellate Court Reports, you would eliminate the app court from your parenthetical in your cite. Also, don't specify your jurisdiction if it is conveyed by your reporter name. Using that Illinois example we just spoke of, your parenthetical already had app court eliminated, since the reporter abbreviation for the Illinois Appellate Court Reports tells us not only the court name, app court, but also IL for Illinois. We can eliminate the IL from our parenthetical as well. In short, your parenthetical, when using the reports from the Illinois Appellate Court Reports, your parenthetical for court, date, and jurisdiction will contain nothing but the date of decision. Speaking of date of decision, that brings us to our final rule for this lesson, Rule 10.5. Under Rule 10.5, we indicate the year of decision after our abbreviations for court name and jurisdiction. In general, this means that you'll put in the date that the case was decided. When in doubt, use the year indicated in the header at the top of the reporter page. Do not use the date of argument. When citing a decision published outside of a reporter, you will need a full date of decision, not just the year. For these and other unusual scenarios, such as citing cases with pending decisions, decisions without opinions, and multiple decisions in a single year, you should consult Rule 10.5. So to review, the full cite to a U.S. Supreme Court case would contain the case name with only the first party listed on either side. If the parties are individuals, then only use last names. The entire name is underlined up to, but not including the comma. The default reporter information for a Supreme Court case is the U.S. reports, abbreviated U.S. Therefore, the reporter information is volume 456, space U.S., space 6 for the page. Finally, since this is a U.S. Supreme Court case, we know that we need not include either the name of the court or the jurisdiction in the parenthetical. Only the date of the decision will appear in the parentheses. This cite, once it is complete, as it is here, is ended with a period. The full cite of an Illinois appellate case might look something like the following. The name of the parties underlined, followed by a comma. Volume 329, space N period E period 2D, standing for the Northeastern Reporter. Notice there's no period after the 2D. And the 2D here, standing for second, follows that same rule we looked at earlier with respect to writing ordinals. 496 appears as the first page of the case. This parenthetical that comes after the page will contain the name of the court and jurisdiction as provided in T1. ILL period space APP period space CT period space, followed by the date of decision, here 1975. Once again, the cite is completed by closing the parentheses and including a period. You're now ready to do a few practice questions. Once the question appears on the screen, pause the podcast until you've drafted your answer. Be sure to use hashtags or pound signs to show your spacing, and take the time to find your answers before skipping ahead to the actual answer. Here's question 1. So how'd you do? You probably formulated the name quickly and correctly, but then things got a little tricky. The question did not give you a name of the reporter, but instead referenced this thing called the relevant reporter. So how did you go about finding the relevant reporter? Well, use T1. If you flip to page 264 in your Blue Book, you'll see the following. Look at the court information for Iowa. From the chart, the Supreme Court, we can see that the Northwestern Reporter did not begin publishing Iowa decisions until 1879. Our case was from 1870. Therefore, it couldn't be in the Northwestern Reporter. Instead, the relevant reporter must be the Iowa Reports, which published decisions from 1855 to 1968. The reporter abbreviation is Iowa. Now, how did I know that it was a Supreme Court case and not an appellate case? Once again, look at that chart. Under Court of Appeals, we can see that there are no reporters for published decisions from an Iowa Court of Appeals prior to 1977. Now, I know I'm trying to formulate a cite to an Iowa Supreme Court case reported in the Iowa Reports. Since it is a decision from the court of last resort, we need not include the name of the court. The only information we need is the name of the jurisdiction. But wait a minute. That reporter title unambiguously conveyed the name of the jurisdiction. Therefore, under Rule 10.4b, we can eliminate the Iowa from our parenthetical. The only information needed in the closing parenthetical is the date of decision, 1870. Note here that I did remember to end my cite with a period. Let's try another practice question. Again, pause until you've crafted your answer. How did you do this time? Did you use T1 again to find your relevant reporter and abbreviation? You were told that this was an appellate case from 1890, so the reporter must be the Indiana Court of Appeals Reports, abbreviated IND-AP. How did you do with your court name and jurisdiction in the parenthetical? Once again, this is a cite that won't require anything other than the date in those parentheses. Although the decision did not come from the court of last resort in Indiana, the reporter abbreviation unambiguously conveyed both the name of the court, APP for appellate, and the jurisdiction, IND for Indiana. Let's try one last practice question. Once again, pause this podcast until you've crafted your answer. So how did you do on this one? Using T1, you should have discovered that the preferred reporter for California Court of Appeals cases is the California Reporter, abbreviated CAL, C-A-L, Reporter RPTR period. The name of the reporter conveys the name of the jurisdiction, but not the name of the court. Therefore, my parenthetical still needs the CT period, APP period, but I can cut the CAL from the abbreviation given in T1. If I were using the Pacific reports, I would need to put that CAL back in. You've now completed Blue Book Lesson 2 and are ready to tackle Blue Book Exercise 2. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to see me, your LARC professor, or your TA.